Ghosting your problems doesn't make them disappear. I know we like to think that way when we're caught up in the overwhelm of whatever we happen to be confronting. The reality is, it doesn't make them go away. I haven't found a single time in my life where ghosting my problems actually solved the problem. In fact, what ended up happening was my problems would build up, waiting for me patiently to show up. And then eventually, when I decided to confront them, they were bigger than if I had actually dealt with them when they had come up in the first place. So I want to give you some insight and some guidance into understanding why that's the case and what you can do to ensure that your problems don't build up and accumulate into these huge mountains that you can't overcome. So let's get into it. Now, like I said, when you ghost your problems, it doesn't actually make them go away. And I see this often, and it's something I used to do, which is when things would start to get hard, I would stick my head in the sand. And it was almost like what toddlers do, covering my eyes. If I can't see the problem doesn't exist. But that's not how things work, right? Because you don't see something doesn't mean it suddenly just disappears. It just sits there patiently waiting for you. And this is true for our problems. So for example, this must be 13 or 14 years ago, I was dealing with a lot of consumer debt. I didn't have a savings plan in place. I had no investment and I wasn't managing my money very well. And so what would I do when I would get my credit card bill every month and my bank statements each month because they were still being posted to me? I'd take a quick glance at the opening and closing balance and then look away. I didn't want to see the rest of it and say, I've got to deal with that somehow. And I will at some point, but not today. And that would happen on repeat. I just keep avoiding the problem because to me, there was so much pain associated with the problem that I'd rather just not have to deal with it. I'd rather go and do something else with my time, which made me feel better, but didn't actually solve the problem. And so it wasn't until I actually stopped and slowed down and looked at, okay, where am I actually spending my money? Where's the control that I have? What can I do about this? That suddenly the problem started to seem more manageable. But because I kept turning away from it, it continued to grow into this big, hairy, overwhelming and intimidating beast that I felt like I had no chances of wrangling or reining in any way possible. So what ended up happening was I'd start to fuel the imagination in my mind of how big the problem was and how overwhelming it was. And so I would start to make it even bigger than what it already was, which meant I only wanted to further delay dealing with it. So I was in this short-term gratification cycle where I was focused more so on making sure that I felt good and I was avoiding pain, but the longer-term pain of having to deal with the debt and the lack of savings and the lack of investments continued to grow, and that was actually causing greater pain for me in the longer term. So the irony is we decide to stick our head in the sand to try and avoid the problem, but then eventually when you pull your head out of the sand, they're all waiting there, just sitting there patiently. Like it's almost like they've pulled up a tent, little sleeping bag saying, we'll just wait until Giorgio gets out of the sand and decides to actually turn around and start facing these different issues. And it's true in all areas of life. Like I experienced this with my financial aspect of my life. I've also seen it in business or in relationships too, or family relationships. There is no area of your life where avoiding the problem tends to make it go away. In fact, it just makes it worse. I saw this especially in my business because there were clients I was working with that I didn't necessarily want to work with. But I was taking them on because I was scared of being perceived as a bad coach or selfish or rejecting them. Because I was so concerned about how they saw me that I would take them on, even though I didn't necessarily want to be working with them. And so the more I kind of stuck my head in the sand with that and continued to work with them and push my own feelings and my own mission and my own personal values aside, it made things quite difficult for me to work with these people. And it got worse and it got worse and it worsened. I would continue to get frustrated the more I worked with them until eventually I said to myself, I don't want to keep doing this. And actually had the conversation with them saying, I don't think I'm the perfect person for you. I don't think I can help you the way others could. And that you could actually use that money to work with somebody that's more suited to your circumstances or your approach to life. And when I did, and this is the key to actually dealing with and confronting the problems you're hiding from, you're more likely to actually experience a greater sense of relief because you've dealt with the thing that has been this open loop in your mind. See, the irony is when we have these unresolved issues in our lives, they consume mental bandwidth, and we've only got a limited amount of mental bandwidth. So if you think about, if you've got 100 points of mental bandwidth and you've got all these different open streams of energy or unresolved matters, they're all consuming, depending on how big they are. Let's say they start with 1 point of mental bandwidth each, but then the longer you leave them, the more mental bandwidth they start to eat up, and it starts to expand to 2 points, 3 points, 7 points, 12, 15 points. And suddenly they're consuming more mental bandwidth simply because it hasn't been dealt with and because there's this open loop of unresolved issues. And so the more you deal with these problems while they're still a 1 point mental bandwidth consumer, you get to deal with it then and there, resolve it, it doesn't grow and it doesn't eat into your capacity to deal with other issues that actually require a significant amount of your mental bandwidth to solve these problems or to tackle the issue or to pursue whatever it is that you're pursuing creatively. So it's really fascinating how these open loops start to consume way too much mental bandwidth, and they're these almost warehouses of accumulated energy that are just sitting dormant. It's almost like you're hoarding all these unresolved issues in that kitchen drawer that everybody has where everything gets thrown into. Or it's that storage cage where you just dump everything into and deal with it later. You do that with your mind, you do that with different areas of your life, and you store these things in your mind as open loops, which is, if this is you, this has happened to me before, when I have an unresolved issue, it tends to wake me up when I'm sleeping. Or if it doesn't actually wake me up, if I do wake up throughout the night, for whatever reason, my mind will just start thinking about it and start going into dealing with the issue. But the only reason my mind's trying to deal with the issue is because I haven't actually dealt with it. I haven't actioned anything. So by dealing with the issue, resolving the problem and bringing closure to it, you close that energetic loop, which means you free up that mental bandwidth to be consumed by things that are actually valuable and important to you. So you've got this accumulation of all these different things that you've been burying your head in the sand with. And then suddenly you start to clear these things off your list, deal with them one by one, each and every one of them, confronting each and every one of these monsters and realizing they're actually just soft plush toys. And as you clear each of them out and you start to empty the storage cage or empty out that drawer, you start to free up the mental bandwidth. You feel lighter, you feel a greater sense of relief. And then you start showing up in the areas of your life that are important to you with the renewed sense of energy. And that's really important because I believe the intention and the energy that we show up to the different areas of our life with actually have a huge impact. Like, it's massive. If I'm burdened by stuff in my business, when I interact with my wife, she picks up on the sense of heaviness that I'm bringing into it. Or my daughter does the same thing. Or if my wife's feeling burdened by being a mother for whatever reason because it was a particularly challenging day, if our daughter was sick, when we're interacting, that bleeds through to how she's feeling and how she's interacting with me, or how she might be speaking to her mother on the phone, or how she might be interacting with people at the store. So we see that where things consume our mental bandwidth and our capacity or our energy capacity, then that starts to affect the other areas. So what I've found, and I've been utilizing this as much as I can, especially in the last, I'd say 4 months, is clearing my plate of as many unresolved issues as I can, no matter how big or small they are. Just get them done and out. And the beauty is I have a renewed sense of energy and I have a greater sense of contentment in these smaller moments. And then when I am focusing on something, I can be focused on it. I'm not distracted by 1,000 different things that are running through my mind because they've all been dealt with. Now, the irony is a lot of people start looking for different tools to help them deal with unresolved matters. Honestly, the tools don't matter. And in fact, I'd argue that the more complex the tool, the more involved it is, the more a distraction that is of actually just dealing with the thing. The simplest tool you can use is a piece of paper and a pen and just get it all out. Everything that's unresolved that needs to be dealt with. Slowly, one by one, cross them off. Or your calendar. Throw things into the calendar. Guess how much time it might take you to do it, put it in the calendar, and if it's in the calendar, you're more likely to do it. I know that's true for me. If it's in my calendar, I'll get it done. If it's not, it's unlikely for me to get it done. You can go and get all kinds of different apps and tools to help you work through different things, and like task managers and so on. I've done that. I've found it to be effective in only the smallest of ways, whereas the simple stuff, the basics, make the biggest difference. And focusing on actually following through with it in spite of the difficulty I'm feeling around it, in spite of the resistance I might feel towards confronting whatever the issue is. I put my feelings aside because I know that the short-term pain I have, or the potential short-term pain that I have of dealing with the issue, is insignificant in comparison to the long-term gain I get by getting this issue dealt with and resolved. That mental bandwidth is gold in my life. And I know it's gold in yours because it consumes attention, and that's all we've got. Attention is a form of time, and time is the only currency that you and I are actually born with. So by being able to reclaim these different areas, you start to reclaim your time. Start focusing on the things you genuinely care about. Now, you might be convinced that your problems are too big to deal with. I'd like, Giorgio, you don't get it. You don't get what I have to deal with, what all the different challenges are. Believe me, I've heard it all. And a lot of it I heard from myself when I used to be like that many years ago. And I've heard all the same stuff from clients, many people over the years. And they've given me the same stories that I held. But they're stories. They're not the truth. Because when we actually bunker down and deal with the issue and confront it, we find that it takes much less time than we originally thought, much less energy than we originally thought, and it's usually less painful than what we expected. And so because of that, what's really interesting is once you get started, you build a momentum, and you take that momentum into the next thing to resolve. And then when that's done, you take it into the next thing to resolve, and the next thing, and the next thing. And you start to compound and build the returns and the momentum where it starts to snowball from one task into the other, and you start to move through things like a hot knife through butter. It's funny, the problems that we all say that we have, they tend to consume us in a way where we believe we're the only ones with those problems. And we've been dealt the hardest hand of cards ever. But I heard this really interesting saying, which I thought is relevant to what I'm talking about. And the quote is, if we all threw our problems into a pile and saw everyone else's, we'd grab ours back because we'd realize that ours aren't actually as bad as what we thought. See, many years ago, I was dealing with what I felt like was a lack of fitness. Like there was a noticeable change in my physiology. I didn't feel as strong. I didn't feel as like I had as much endurance throughout the day. I felt like my energy levels would crash really suddenly. And what was happening was I didn't want to go and get checkups done because I was imagining that it was going to reveal deeper problems. And if I was aware of those deeper problems, I then had to go and do something about that. And that would be even harder. So what did I do? I won't go find out. I'll just deal with it with the knowledge that I've got. I'll just deal with the circumstances that I'm dealing with and sort of piece it all together myself. It didn't work. The way I was feeling continued. It may have even worsened. And then eventually I was like, my health is all I've got. If I don't have my health, I'm not going to be able to get anything done. As the saying goes, a healthy person has 1,000 wishes, but a sick person has only one wish. And so when I realized that for myself, I was like, okay, well, it's time to actually deal with what I'm feeling in my body and go and investigate it, go and get some answers. And that meant investing money, investing time, and overcoming the fears of the different stories I had in my mind about what I was going to find out according to my imagination. So I went down the path of going and getting as many answers as I could to try and find out what was going on. And I did. And I found out the problem wasn't nearly as big as what I thought it was. It was predominantly nutritional. I was under-eating. I was malnourished. And my sleep was shocking because I was dealing with different stresses at the time. So then realizing that, I was able to turn around and go, okay, well, Now that I know that it's not nearly as bad as what I thought, thankfully, that's not the case for everybody, and I understand. But for me at the time, that's what I realized. Once I had confronted the big hairy monster that I was imagining in my mind, I realized it was actually a soft little plush toy. So I'm like, okay, I can actually do something about this. And I started working on it, and I started feeling differently. Whereas had I continued to say, no, that's a little too big and overwhelming for me, I'm not going to deal with it. And I would have continued to feel like crap. Like I said, I experienced the same thing with my finances. And I've had the same thing in different relationships and friendships over the years, that when something went undealt with, it would become bigger than it needed to. I would become resentful of the person. They would pick up on that resentment. They'd get passive aggressive with me. Then I'd get frustrated and angry with their passive aggression. And it would just create like these weird cycles. Whereas if I had just dealt with the issue at the beginning, it wouldn't have evolved into this elaborate drama, and that it didn't need to, because I would have been able to do something about it by taking ownership and responsibility of it. So I encourage you, and I do this as much as I possibly can. The moment I notice an issue starting to show up, I do my best to address it internally. What's in my way of actually dealing with it? And then I go and take action on it. So sometimes, and this is really important, when it comes to dealing with things that you're avoiding, you've got to ask yourself, why are you avoiding it? What is it about that particular thing that you don't want to face? And more often than not, it's usually a story that we tell ourselves. It means something about ourselves. If I deal with this, if I say to this person, I'm not liking our friendship, or I don't like the way you're treating me, or something like that, that says something about me. That means that I'm weak, I'm vulnerable, I'm the one that's complaining, I'm the one that's not liking this and I need to change. Or you're worried that they're going to judge you or criticize you. Whatever the story is, that's what's stopping you from actually dealing with the issue. So it's important for you to actually bring out of the unconscious mind what the problem is, what it is that you're feeling resistance about, because that's going to reveal to you more about why you're not taking action and confronting the things that you're scared of. Because I assure you, the fear is much bigger than what the actual problem is. When you start to realize that, when you shine a light on the things that you're concerned with, you start to see they're not nearly as actually big as what your fears are telling you they are. That's when you start to become the person that takes ownership of your life, takes ownership of your circumstances, and you stop succumbing to the fears that keep showing up because they're just stories based on old experiences. Those experiences aren't relevant to today. So by taking ownership, you stop relying on the old experiences to inform the present day experiences because they're not related. I had this with a client who's a lawyer and has been very busy for a long time. And what started to happen was the work would get really busy. They'd start to fall behind in meeting deadlines for certain clients or getting matters dealt with for clients in a particular time frame. And because it started getting overwhelming, they'd start to bury their head in the sand. So they'd start ignoring emails, ignoring phone calls, text messages, not responding. And what would happen was these matters would then continue to go on for the clients, and the clients would then start following up with a second email, third email, fourth email, one phone call, a follow-up phone call, voice messages, text messages for this one matter. So by not dealing with it, the issue was that my client was facing was, I've got to get through all these different emails. I've got to respond to all these different texts. I've got to call all these different clients back. But when we sat down and went through it, they realized that 6 or 7 emails were related to the one email, the one original email that hasn't been dealt with. And 3 of those phone calls were about the same thing. And 5 of those text messages were about the same thing, simply because my client wasn't actually addressing the issue when it came in or giving the client an accurate timeline. And so then they'd get all these follow-ups which would create more work to then go and respond to. Whereas if they had dealt with the issue back when they dealt with it, when it came in, this backlog of extra communication wouldn't slow them down. So the irony is, by them sticking their head in the sand going, this is all too hard, I can't keep up with it, they were actually creating more work for themselves. Whereas if they had created a streamlined process to be able to deal with it, like when they got an email saying, can you help me with this? Yes, I can start working on that in a month from now. Let's circle back in a month and we can start tackling that. If that timeline works for you, great. If not, let me refer you to somebody who can actually deal with it in the time you want it done. And then suddenly they've given themselves the mental bandwidth to focus on whatever matter they're dealing with then and there. And they give themselves time to circle back to dealing with this client. Or if it's a small enough issue, deal with it then and there. Give me a couple of days, I'll get back to you. We'll sort it out and we'll get you on. So the reason they weren't doing that was because they kept dealing with this backlog, and the backlog was created by sticking their head in the sand and avoiding it. By turning around and confronting it, you minimize how much there is to do long term, which reduces the overwhelm. And I've got case and case and case and case of this in different areas of life: business, finances, health, relationships, dating, family issues, family conflict. It's fascinating how much that we create problems and we make them bigger than what they are by not dealing with them. But by actually dealing with them, the problems shrink and they're dealt with. And they tend to go away because we actually turn around and confront them. And it makes me think of this wonderful quote in this page of a Dr. Seuss book that I've been reading my daughter since she was born, called Oh, the Places You'll Go. And there's a picture of the main character in the story turning around and confronting their problems. And they're this tiny little person in comparison to this huge monster. But when they actually turn around and confront the monster, they're not nearly as intimidating. They're a little soft and they're not as scary as what they thought. It's a really beautiful analogy for how most people, if they actually just turn around and face their issues, they'd see that they're not as scary as what they thought. So use this as motivation. Please use this as inspiration to keep you going. List out all the things that you haven't dealt with. Confront them. Start working through them one by one. Do 1 or 2 of them each week and watch how you start to build a momentum and a sense of relief. And I promise you, the mental bandwidth that frees up for you, it's a goldmine for life. Think about it. If you're no longer concerned with these open-ended issues that haven't been dealt with, you can be more present in whatever it is you choose to do, even if it's going for a walk down at the beach. That's what we're here to do. We're here to actually enjoy our lives. Experience the moments of life that don't have to be consumed by worry as a result of unresolved stuff. So get to work. Start clearing those things out. Clear the baggage out. Work through the closet. Work through the storage cage. Get it all dealt with. You don't need to carry this stuff into the future. And you probably don't want to. Just ask your future self. So I hope that's been helpful. If it has, please make sure you share this with somebody you know has been sticking their head in the sand, because we all know that person. And this may be the one thing they need to help invigorate them to go and actually start dealing with them. Thanks for being here. I hope this has been valuable for you. And I'll see you next time. Bye.